Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Some watch industry news today, talking about the name change of SIHH from SIHH to Watches and Wonders Geneva. Now that Watches and Wonders Geneva bit is important, but I'll get to that in a second. A little bit, SIHH is a rival show to Baselworld, big watch industry show, invitation only, watch dealers, big high-enders and watch media only, really set up a couple of years ago by the Richemont Group as an alternative to Baselworld, as almost competition to Baselworld. Those shows have run next to each other for the last couple of years. SIHH and Baselworld were planning on working closer together next year. That had been announced some time ago. They now run back to back, allowing journalists to move from one show to the other. That was good news, but not groundbreaking. The name change from SIHH to Watches and Wonders might not at first glance be groundbreaking, but might hold some clues for bigger news that we hadn't really thought about. Because you see, Watches and Wonders have been around for a while. Watches and Wonders Geneva joins other shows, becomes part of a suite of other shows, which includes Watches and Wonders Miami and Watches and Wonders Hong Kong. I'm not aware that there's any others. I'll do another quick check before I publish this video, but I think it's just Hong Kong and Miami. So now SIHH, which is sitting next to Baselworld, is itself openly and avowedly one of 3 shows that's going to be held around the world. So you'll imagine that what goes on at Watches and Wonders Geneva will be kind of similar to the sorts of things that you see at the other Watches and Wonders shows. That would make sense. So to get us an idea of where Watches and Wonders Geneva might go, it's interesting to look at the sorts of things that happen at Watches and Wonders in other countries. The first thing I would say is Omega was at Watches and Wonders Miami and had one of their major releases for this year at that show. Omega, part of Swatch Group that pulled out of Baselworld, has had major releases at Watches and Wonders this year. What does that mean for next year? What does that mean moving forward? Might we see, in all of this discussion about Swatch pulling out of Baselworld, might we see some of the major players, maybe not their entire suite, but those big releases that they want to get coverage, might we see them turning up at SIHH? So that, or sorry, I'll rephrase that, might we see them turning up at Watches and Wonders? So whereas in the old days when Omega turned up at Baselworld, they felt compelled to bring everything and have those massive great stores, is it possible that what they'll do is they will turn up to Watches and Wonders Geneva, but instead of having 10,000 square meters or 10,000 square feet and multiple offices and everything, they actually have a relatively small booth, really only focusing on the new releases for that year? I don't know. I'm not even really, actually, I'll go out on a limb. I'm going to predict that that's what we'll see. I'm going to predict that what we will see at Watches and Wonders Geneva is Swatch Group companies introducing their new watches. They won't have everything. They won't have a full Baselworld style show, but there will be a boutique or some sort of pop-up where they will get the coverage they want of their new watches. I'll go out on a limb and predict that now. And some other news that came out this week that was reported in Watch Pro really tells you why Omega and the other Swatch Group companies, and in fact other companies like Richemont and LVMH, may want to move to something like a Watches and Wonders instead of Baselworld. The big news this week was that some independent analysis from Moody's, I think it was, but reported in Watch Pro, estimates that over 50% of Swatch sales are made to people of Chinese descent. That might not necessarily mean in China, although the vast bulk are in China. Many that aren't in China are just outside China, so they're in Asian countries, or they might be in countries like Australia, where it's people from China buying the watches here. So that's over 50% of their consumers, however, are coming from China. In that world, and by the way, they also they made mention of similar but not as stark figures for Richemont and LVMH. If I get this right, I might get it round the wrong way. I think it was Richemont are looking like 42% of their sales are in to Chinese nationals, and 30% of LVMH. If I've got that around the wrong way, I'll fix it in the notes. So when you start thinking about that, when you start thinking half the people that buy my watches are Chinese, maybe I think it's 13 or 14% might be from the US, probably 15-20% in Europe, and the rest all over the place. When you start just put those facts on the table, it would be ridiculous of someone like Omega to lock themselves into that one big massive show at Baselworld. It starts to make complete sense why they would pull out of Baselworld and instead move to something else. And for a while we've been wondering what that something else might be. Might that something else be Watches and Wonders, a show which has representation in Europe, in the United States, and most importantly in China. Now it's in Hong Kong at the moment, but it doesn't have to stay there. It could just as easily become Watches and Wonders Shanghai in 2021, 2022, relatively easily. And I would not be at all surprised to see that, given some of the other discussion that's come out in actually more general media about the transfer, particularly given the problems that are going in Hong Kong at the moment, but potentially going back for some time, the transfer of a lot of luxury buying in the Chinese market out of Hong Kong to Shanghai anyway. The transition from SIHH simply to Watches and Wonders looks less and less like a kind of last minute, let's fit everything in kind of move, and probably a long-term strategic activity that may have been in the planning for several years. I'll just wrap this up with a discussion around what this means for kind of like the economic and environmental impact of watch shows. Now, I'm not going to say for an instant that this is being driven by the environment, but there has been some discussion, and Rick and Ricky in the last Scottish Watches kind of came over pretty hard on, don't profess to me that you've got these, great environmental credentials when you're flying your CEO around the world to multiple places just so that you can talk about your watches, especially when, and they were talking about George Kern, especially when you've turned your back on something like Baselworld where you could have limited your travel. And they've got a point, except I think they also miss a much larger point, and that is Europe does not represent, it represents the centre of watchmaking, but it does not represent the centre of watch buying. It is a peripheral player when it comes to watch buying. If you were absolutely serious about wanting to limit the environmental impact of watch shows, then the answer is absolutely plain. Every year there would be something like a Shanghai watch show where relatively small numbers of people from Europe would travel across into China. That's where the big show would be, and then because that's where 50% of the market is, and everybody else would just send a few journalists. That would be the sensible thing. Baselworld is absolutely not a sensible place to have that world's watch community come to look at watches. That's guaranteeing that if having the show in Europe means that by definition, 70-ish%, probably more, probably 70, probably closer to 80% of the watch market has to fly internationally, has to fly intercontinentally to get to you. So I think given that it is unlikely that Baselworld will close, given that it's extremely unlikely, and it would be wrong not to have a watch show in Europe, I think rather than expect the tens of thousands of people that go to Watches and Wonders Miami and Watches and Wonders Hong Kong drag their asses all the way over to Europe for that one show a year, I think Watches and Wonders probably represents the best compromise, the best way of moving forward. So that's really it. Hasn't been a lot of other watch industry news that's caught my eye. There's been a lot of discussion about sales. I've deliberately chosen not to chase them down on a month-by-month basis. There's at the next month, we'll start getting quarterly, third quarter results for 2019. So next month, when those figures come out, I plan on doing a much bigger look at some industry trends and in sales and so forth. I think if you look at it month by month, you can get caught up in individual events. So next month, I'll be looking at those. What do you think? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think that the world would be a better place if there was just this one big Baselworld and that's where everything was, and you got to see the whole of the collections? Or do you like this thing that's emerging where there could be, say, 3 big shows every year, one in each of the major continents, one in the Americas, one in Asia, one in Europe? Do you think that's the smarter way to go, and that those brands which have not left Baselworld might want to consider turning up at Watches and Wonders in these other ones as well? Tell me what you think in the comments. Tell me if you think my prediction is completely off base. Make your own predictions about who do you think may have left Baselworld but might turn up at Watches and Wonders in future. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. If you wait a little while, a card's going to come up. It's got my Instagram handle and it's got my email address. Feel free to contact me. You can see more about my watches, my life, my watch collection if you do go over to Instagram. It's mostly my watches. Speaking of watches, today I am wearing my Mueller Glasuta M99 City. A quick one on that, really interesting. I was getting ready to do a review of this watch and it's almost impossible to get information, at least in English. There's a little bit in German on the website. I wrote to the company and just said, this is who I am. I've bought the watch. I'd like some more information. And within 6 hours, they had sent me archived copies of old press releases and old technical information which had obviously been withdrawn some years ago. So well done, Mueller Glasuta. I was already a fan. It's now even more of a crush. Thank you very much.